Okay. Good day. Our topic for today is bone marrow and blood cell formation. This is actually a two lecture topics. Later, we will be discussing the blood cell. But first, let's talk about bone marrow and blood cell formation. Okay. Okay. Our objectives for this morning is to differentiate the types of bone marrow. We have actually two. We have red bone marrow and the yellow bone marrow. And we will be discussing the genesis of the formed elements of the blood. Now, as a laboratory medical science students, this is our bread and butter. No, kahit mag-medicine kayo, ito ang edge natin. As medical technologists, the blood cell. Okay. As discussed before, when we say blood cells, they're actually short-lived. No, they are continuously replaced from sources outside the circulation, and the term for the process of blood cell formation is known as your hemopoiesis. And we have actually hematopoietic organs. These are bone marrow, spleen, liver, but we will be discussing the stages of hemopoiesis in a while. Alright, so at the earliest fetal life, it is believed to arise from the yolk sac mesoderm, yung RBC, or what we call your erythrocyte. No? The liver and the spleen in the earliest fetal life serve as a temporary hemopoietic tissue organs. Okay, the liver and the spleen. But by the second month, take note that the clavicles have begun to ossify or form bone and begin to develop bone marrow by the second month. But the bone marrow itself becomes now the predominant hemopoietic tissue. Okay, it replaces the liver and spleen, which serves as temporary hematopoietic organs. Okay, after birth and in the adults, the development of these red blood cells and granular leukocytes, or the WBCs, are derived mostly from the bone marrow itself. No, there are a large number of lymphocytes and monocytes are also developed in the bone marrow after birth and in the adult life. Alright, so let's talk about the different phases of hemopoiesis. Now, let's start with the fetal hemopoiesis. We have what we call mesoblastic phase. Now, this one actually occurs during the second week of life. Now, they are first detectable in the mesenchyme of the body stalk and the neighboring areas of the yolk sac. So, in the mesoblastic phase, there is what we call blood islands. And these blood islands are defined as the clusters of mesenchymal cells that round up and differentiate into a large basophilic cells. Later on, we'll be discussing these different stages of cell formation. The earliest basophilic cells will differentiate into primitive erythroblasts, and they synthesize hemoglobin, and they will develop into immature red blood cells called your erythrocytes. Now, class, ngayon pa lang, sasabihin ko na sa inyo, when you heard of the term blast, there are immature. Okay? We don't have blast cells in the blood circulation pag adult life na tayo. If there are blast cells na makikita kayo sa blood circulation, there is something wrong with the bone marrow. Nagre-release agad sila ng immature blood na di pwede. No? Dapat nasa bone marrow lang ang blast. Kapag nakita ka ng blast sa blood circulation, you think of a blood dyscrasia or blood problem. Alright, so after the mesoblastic phase, no, this occurs at the second week and they are at the blood island. We'll go now to your hepatic phase. Now, from the word itself, no, hepatic phase, it occurs in the liver, no, at the primordium of the liver, and the hepatic phase starts at the 6 weeks age of gestation. Now, class, kapag age of gestation, ibig sabihin, ito yung weeks or months na pinagbubuntis ni mommy si baby. Okay? 6 weeks pregnant in layman's term. Pero as medical laboratory science students, 6 weeks age of gestation is 6 weeks na pregnant si mom. Okay, we will be using age of gestation. Now, at this phase, the definitive erythroblast will give rise to a nucleated erythrocytes. As we all know, RBCs they don't have nucleus, right? But in this phase, after the definitive erythroblast, they will give rise kagad sa RBC na anucleated. Okay? If your mesoblastic phase occurs at the second week, in the hepatic phase, as early as 6 weeks and 2 second month, hepatic phase naman. At the second month age of gestation, the granular leukocyte or the WBCs and the megakaryocytes will appear in the sinusoids of the liver. At this phase, okay, at second month age of gestation, the spleen will now become the site of hemopoiesis. Okay? The spleen will now be the site of hemopoiesis. Now take note, 6 weeks sa liver. Second month, spleen ang site of hemopoiesis. Doc, ano ulit yung site of hemopoiesis? This is the place where blood cell formation is formed. Okay? And lastly, is the myeloid phase. Now, the blood vessels now will begin to penetrate into cavities that are created by the generation of chondrocytes. And what are chondrocytes? These are known as your cartilage cells, right? Now, this blood vessel formation from these chondrocytes will begin during the 4th month age of gestation. In this phase, they will differentiate into bones now, forming your osteoblast and reticulum cells. If you remember sa bones and cartilage lecture ko last prelims, when this is actually the endochondral ossification. From the hyaline cartilage, they will develop, they will be replaced by your osteoblast. And then, from this osteoblast, bone formation develops, no? The blood formation at this myeloid phase begins in the primitive bone marrow, initiating the myeloid phase of hemopoiesis. So at this point, it's safe to say that at 4th month age of gestation, myeloid phase now appears. Blood formation begins, and the bone marrow is the major blood-forming organ right now at this 4th month age of gestation until adult life. Okay? So those are the 3 phases of fetal hemopoiesis. So hindi pa lumalabas si baby this time. So again, when I say age of gestation, these are the weeks of pregnancy or months of pregnancy ni mommy. Okay, so when we say bone marrow, this is also known as your myeloid tissue. So your clue here is that if you are at the myeloid phase, you are at the bone marrow. That's it. Okay? So the bone marrow is known as your myeloid tissue. They are found in the medullary canals of the long bones or in the cavities of your spongy bones. There are 2 types of bone marrow. We have red bone marrow and the yellow bone marrow. Okay, let's talk about the red bone marrow first. At the newborns, the bone marrow is the red bone marrow in the newborns. But in the adults, where we can find bone marrow, where are the sites where we can find bone marrow? These are at the flat bones. Example are your sternum. This is found at the center of your thoracic cage. Ribs, clavicle, pelvis, skull, vertebra, and the proximal epiphysis of the femur and humerus. Now, as a medical laboratory science students, take note na hindi lang tayo pwedeng makakuha ng blood sa blood vessels. We can also extract blood using bone marrow. Okay, this is actually very complicated. No, ginagamit na lang yung bone marrow or yung bone or intraosseous. Ibig sabihin ng intraosseous kukuha ka sa bone marrow, no, as a blood specimen kasi wala ka na makitang dugo sa blood vessel. Mahirap kuhanan yung patient, for example. So this was actually referred to doctors or some hematologists, they really perform intraosseous blood collection kapag wala na talagang access sa blood. Kasi nga, hindi makuha because of, for example, matanda, madali mag-collapse yung blood vessels, etc. But in the adults, we can find bone marrow in the following. Okay? Alright, this is a picture, no, para mayroon kayo idea. Notice this, class, at the left side of the screen. Familiar ba? Hindi. This is actually very familiar. This is your spongy bone, right? This is the trabeculae. Now, what are those, class? Can you tell me what are those cells that are found here at the bone matrix? These are your what cells?
Osteocytes.
Very good. Maintains bone matrix are the osteocyte. Now, in this area, this is the the trabeculae, but the whole organ is the spongy bone. This one, class, is actually your bone marrow itself. A stands for adipose cells or adipocytes. Your C here stands for the hematopoietic cords. This is where bone marrow na to. This is the bone marrow, class. So these are the adipocytes or fat cells. The hematopoietic cords, part of a bone marrow. These are actually our sinusoids, blood supply of the bone marrow. So in this area, in this spongy bone, we've talked about the trabeculae or the bone matrix last prelim. But for this first topic of the midterms, ito na ang concern natin, the bone marrow itself. This is where blood cell formation occurs. And so, red bone marrow functions, number one, is the production of blood cells. Now, we can visualize bone marrow in the different immature developmental stages, but actually, medyo mahirap ma-identify ang mga different developmental stages if you are talking about bone marrow. No, but we will be talking each, because we are medical laboratory scientists, each stages in a while. Okay? This is also where destruction of the erythrocytes are found. Ano pa yung isang organ where RBC are destroyed? This is the spleen. Okay? Doc, bakit may destruction of the erythrocytes? No, if ever hindi na magko-continue si stage of that RBC, dun pa lang sa bone marrow, destroyed na siya. Para the destroyed RBC will not be found in the circulation anymore, in our blood vessels. Also, since there are RBCs in here, there are storage of iron as one of the function of your bone marrow. And at the bone marrow also, there are production of undifferentiated B and T lymphocytes. Okay? Alright, now, red bone marrow is also called the hematogenous or active bone marrow. Meaning, obviously, no, at this red bone marrow, hematogenous because this is where hematopoiesis occur. Right? Active bone marrow kasi kung walang bone marrow, walang RBC na bago after 120 days. Okay? Now, the color is due to the presence of numerous red blood cells and their precursors. At the red bone marrow also, we can also find reticular cells and reticular fibers and some free cells. They actually form a sponge-like structure traversed by numerous sinusoidal capillaries. So, sabi nila, ito daw type na to, ito yung bulalo na kinakain natin sa Tagaytay, no? Kaya maraming fats doon. Kasi nga, look at this histology, maraming adipose cells. Doon galing ang blood cell. Dito sa hematopoietic cords. But in the bone marrow itself, hindi lang si bone marrow yun nandun. Meron din mga fats. Okay? Kaya yan daw ang masarap kainin sa bulalo. The yellow bone marrow is the adult type. Now, they are found in the medullary cavities of long bones. They are rich in adipose cells that do not produce blood cells. No? So, anong pinoproduce nila? They contain just macrophages, undifferentiated mesenchymal cells, and reticular cells. Functions of yellow bone marrow, it's just for storage organ. No? as I mentioned kanina, as bone marrow, ayun po yung bulalo. Okay, yung bulalo, diba nasa buto siya? And they are found at the medullary cavities. So, yung mga part na yan na kinakain ninyo, storage lang siya. Okay? By virtue of its richness in fats. Pero, the yellow bone marrow, one of the function is reserve of hematopoietic tissue in pathological conditions. Meaning, in cases of abnormal production of RBC, meron tayong reserve. Not just the red bone marrow, but also the yellow bone marrow as well. Alright, so there are theories. No? The blood cell formation theory, we have three. We have unitarian or monophyletic theory. All formed elements of blood will originate from a single stem cell, which is hemocytoblast, which is later will become pluripotential stem cells. So sabi dito sa theory na to, isa lang, si hemocytoblast lang. That's the unitarian or monophyletic theory. What about dualistic? No? The dualistic or diphyletic theory, the blood cells will arise from two stem cells. These are the myeloblast and the lymphoblast. When we say myeloblast, myeloid, these are RBC and granular leukocytes. Granular leukocytes class, these are the white blood cells. Okay? The lymphoblast will, this is where lymphocytes and monocytes are derived. So, in the dualistic or diphyletic theory, madaling tandaan, they arise from two stem cells, namely the myeloblast and the lymphoblast. And in the polyphyletic theory, existence of a primitive stem cells for each type of blood cell. So, hindi lang siya dalawa, no? Dapat daw for every blood cell, mayroong isang primitive stem cell. And that's what we call your polyphyletic theory. Kung RBC, RBC galing. WBC, WBC galing. Kung platelets, kung neutrophil, kung eosinophil, these are the white blood cells. Isa lang daw stem cell each blood cell line. So, tingnan natin. Okay. Hemopoietic stem cells, the primitive stem or the parent cell in both myeloid and lymphatic tissues is known as your hemocytoblast. Okay? They are able to differentiate into several different types of mature blood cells, and they are known also as your pluripotential hemopoietic stem cells. So, hemocytoblast, so they are immature, they are largest, pero pag sa mo hemocytoblast, dyan galing lahat. No? Check out this picture. Yeah. So, this is your hemocytoblast. Wait lang. Yan. So, meron siyang two lines, myeloid line and lymphoid line. Actually, class, ito palang diagram na to, tapos na ang lecture natin. Okay? Look, this is the hemocytoblast. The myeloid line will have the myeloid stem cell. This is the multipotential colony-stimulating factor, multi-CSF colony-stimulating factor, and multipotential colony-stimulating factor. This is the erythropoiesis. Ang turnout nito, the product of erythropoiesis is the erythrocyte. So, dadaanan natin tong lahat in a while. Okay? Look at the thrombopoiesis. Thrombopoiesis is the term used for platelet formation. That is why from this myeloid stem cell to progenitor megakaryoblast, they will become platelets. Okay? For this leukopoiesis, this is when I say leuko in general, it's white blood cells. Okay? So, when you say leukopoiesis, white blood cell, so, dalawa yan. Ay, isa lang to. So, this is the myeloblast will become promyelocyte at depende kung ano magiging siya. Like eosinophil, basophil, or neutrophils. But, isa lang siya galing. Dito lang siya galing sa granulocyte, monocyte, colony-stimulating factor. That is the specific colony-stimulating factor, progenitor cell for this blood, blood. Eosinophil, basophil, neutrophil, and monocyte. For the lymphoid line, this is the lymphoid stem cell. We have P lymphoblast and T lymphoblast. Madaling tandaan, if it is from B lymphoblast, it will become your B lymphocyte. And T lymphoblast, we have your T lymphocyte. Okay? That diagram says it all. Itong blood cell formation na to. Okay, let's start with the erythropoiesis, or the formation of your red blood cells. The development of a mature RBC will just take about 3 days only. The lifespan of your red blood cell would be 120 days, right? So the main function of this red blood cell is to synthesize hemoglobin. Now, formation of a small erythrocyte in the greatest possible area for the diffusion of oxygen. Take note, class, red blood cell or erythrocyte is the mature red blood cell. Wala na siyang nucleus. Okay? Alright, so in erythropoiesis, there are major morphologic and histologic changes that occur during its maturation. And we have to take note one by one. Cell volume decreases. So, from erythroblast na malaki, ang mature, maliit na siya. The nucleoli diminish in size until they become invisible under light microscope. The nuclear diameter decreases and the chromatin becomes denser. There is decrease in the number of polyribosomes or basophilia. That's why during its maturation, kung nag-decrease ang basophilia, nag-increase naman ang acidophilic or amount of hemoglobin. And the quantity of mitochondria diminishes as well. So the function of the RBC is to deliver hemoglobin from the different organs from the heart, right? So ang RBC kapag oxygenated, ibig sabihin may dalang hemoglobin yan. So from the heart, goes to different organs at kung decrease ang hemoglobin, ibig sabihin pwede ka magkaroon ng anemia. Okay? Right, so this is the different stages of your RBC. So mamaya we will discuss this one by one. Like this one. So the earliest stage that develops from the pluripotential stem cell yun ngayon sa diagram is the proerythroblast. This is also known as your rubriblast. Now class, no? Ngayon pa lang i-memorize yun na to if you have time, because in hematology next year, hindi lang isa ang synonyms ng mga proerythroblast na to. Marami. Yun ang kailangan tandaan in hematology. But as an introduction to hematology, in histology, kailangan alam natin to. Okay? Now, the proerythroblast is also known as a rubriblast. The cell here is large, rounded nucleus, and uniformly dispersed chromatin pattern. Nucleoli is present and it has a basophilic cytoplasm. Now, remember, sabi natin, no, as RBC mature, there's decrease in the number of polyribosomes or basophilia. So, first stage pa lang, basophilic kagad ang cytoplasm niya. Okay, blue. So, this is the proerythroblast or rubriblast. Next is your basophilic erythroblast or your pre-rubricite. This is smaller than the proerythroblast. The nucleus contains coarse chromatin. There is absent nucleoli, and still it has a basophilic cytoplasm. Okay. Next is the rubricite. This one, if the pre-rubricite is basophilic, your rubricite is polychromatophilic erythroblast. So, when you say polychromatophilic, okay, pag makulay, rubricite na siya. Now, the cells show mixed colors varying from purplish blue to lilac to gray. The nucleus here has a denser chromatin network. It is smaller. The coarser chromatin bodies will give a checkerboard appearance. That's your clue. The hemoglobin is of sufficient quantity at this point. And there is decreased basophilia. Now, look, at the rubricite level, pababa na yung basophilia niya, tumataas na yung acidophilia niya or hemoglobin. No, not really mataas, sufficient lang ang quantity. But all you need to remember in the polychromatophilic erythroblast, there is varying of colors. There is a checkerboard appearance of your coarser chromatin bodies. They are smaller compared to the two stages mentioned, and hemoglobin now is of sufficient quantity. This is your rubrocyte. Okay? Tandaan nyo lang, rubrocyte, maraming color, it's a mix, so it's polychromatophilic erythroblast. Okay? Okay, next, normoblast. So, sabi natin from basophilia, maging acidophilia. Pero, dadaan muna siya sa polychromatophilic. Siyempre, kailangan may transition. So, from this erythroblast, nagiging acidophilic erythroblast na siya, or what we know as your normoblast. Okay, normoblast. Doc, paano namin matataan na it's normoblast? Diba sabi natin, dapat acidophilic na ang RBC, pero immature pa siya. So, tama, immature kasi erythroblast siya, pero nagsa-start na siyang acidophilic. So, ibig sabihin, pwede na siya mag-normal, naging RBC niya. Pero, blast pa din siya. Okay? It has same amount of hemoglobin as red blood cells. They exhibit now acidophilia. Nag-predominate na si acidophilia compared to basophilia. There are smaller than si basophilic nucleolus. Uy, bakit basophilic pa din? It's basophilic nucleolus niya, pero it's acidophilic na yung buong cell. Okay? The nucleus becomes pycnotic and it is extruded now from the cell. The small fragments of nucleus, which occasionally remain, that will give rise to deeply staining bodies called your Howell-Jolly bodies. Take note of that. Okay? This small fragment of nucleus called your Howell-Jolly bodies are found in the normoblast or acidophilic erythroblast. Ba't nagkakaroon pa ng ganyan, Doc, pag in-stain? So kapag nakita kayo ng Howell-Jolly bodies in blood circulation, for example, kinuha na kayong dugo, at nakita ang medtech kayo ng Howell-Jolly bodies, what are your thoughts? What are you thinking? Uy, if merong Howell-Jolly bodies pa to, na small fragments ng nucleus, merong normoblast sa circulation. Is it normal or abnormal? It is abnormal. Okay? Nagkaroon, binigay mo agad yung, pinakawalan mo kaagad yung immature RBC sa circulation, which is hindi dapat. Okay? Kasi, madaling mamatay ang immature. No? Hindi boyfriend o girlfriend ha, na immature. Immature RBC ay madaling mamatay kasi nga, yung 120 days na mature RBC, the immature RBC usually days lang or less than 20 or less than 30 days kasi nga kulang sila sa hemoglobin. Okay? And last, before the red blood cell mature RBC is the reticulocyte. Okay? Ito, sabi nila, pwedeng makita sa RBC. Pero, look at the percentage. Dapat less than 1% lang. Okay? Again, dito sa normoblast, dapat wala kang makitang normoblast sa circulation. 0 dapat. Paano ka makakita? Howell-Jolly bodies kapag na-stain. Okay? But the reticulocyte, this is the youngest red blood cell that is found in the circulation. Bakit youngest? Kasi nga, reticulocyte, after the reticulocyte, RBC na siya. Okay? So, pwede kang makakita. Pero, the normal value for reticulocyte is less than 1%. Now, in a normal hematoxin and eosin stain, you cannot detect reticulocyte. Supravital staining with crescel blue demonstrates a delicate reticulum of variable appearance and sizes that stains dark blue in an otherwise pink cytoplasm. So, kitang-kita mo ang reticulocyte using supravital staining, especially the crescel blue. Okay? The reticulocyte is the index. Okay? Please take note. This is one of my favorite questions in practical and in the examination. Index of erythropoiesis, or the other term, dependable index of the rate of formation of the new red blood cells is your reticulocyte. Okay? Recovery of patients from blood loss or the response to treatment for anemia. Kapag tumataas, nagkakaroon ng increased reticulocyte count for patients having blood loss or in response to the treatment for anemia. Dok, bakit? Kasi nga, may immature na lumalabas sa circulation in response to, for example, blood loss or in response, for example, to treatment of anemia. hindi pa dapat lumalabas, no? For example, nagkaroon ka ng accident, tapos madaming blood loss. Since ang body natin will detect blood loss, the reticulocyte, being the youngest erythrocyte that is found in the circulation, will become increased in response to blood loss. Kasi nga, dumadami na, nawawala ni RBC. Hindi naman sila namamatay, pero lumalabas sila sa circulation. That is why reticulocytes, high reticulocyte count are found in these patients. Blood loss and in response for the treatment of anemia. Okay? So this is just a summary of the erythrocyte maturation from the proerythroblast, basophilic, polychromatophilic erythroblast will come your meron pang orthochromatophilic na to. Huwag niyo na itong intindihin. Yun na lang sa ito na lang. Polychromatophilic, normoblast, reticulocyte. Okay? This will just show you the summary of erythrocyte maturation and dapat daw within, anong sabi dito? 3 days. Develop na dapat ang mature RBC. Now, in cases of blood loss, the erythropoiesis will take 1 to 2 days lang, or minutes, or hours kapag may blood loss. Pero, in a normal individual, it will take about 3 days to complete the full cycle of erythropoiesis. Okay? And the last stage is the, of course, mature RBC, or the erythrocyte, no, or the red blood cell. They are described as having a biconcave disc. They are enucleated, walang nucleus, large numbers in the bone marrow parenchyma, and they are released into the peripheral blood. Okay? Now, any question in the erythropoiesis? Doc, marami pong terms, yes, pero tinuruan ko kayo kung paano kabisaduhin. Okay? Just ignore the orthochromatophilic. Why? Kasi mas pag-uusapan yan sa hematology. This is just basic introduction to hematology. Okay? Question. Class. Pwede ba tayo makakita ng reticulocyte sa blood circulation? Yes or no? Pwede ba tayo makakita ng reticulocyte?
Yes po.
Yes. Anong mga cases?
Blood loss.
Blood loss or in the response to the treatment of anemia. And what's the normal value of your reticulocyte in the blood?
Less than 1 po.
Very good, less than 1%. And what is the cell among the erythropoietic cells is the index of erythropoiesis?
Reticulocyte.
Very good, reticulocyte. Yeah, thank you for answering. Let's go now to your granulopoiesis. Okay? Doc, ano na to? So, after erythropoiesis, let's go now to your granulopoiesis. These are your granular white blood cells. Alright, so let's start with myeloblast. Okay? So, this is from the pluripotential stem cell as mentioned in the diagram. So, the myeloblast is deeply staining base. It has a deeply staining basophilic cytoplasm and they are devoid of granules at first. Okay, wala silang granules. They are also described as having a round or oval nucleus or sometimes 2 or more nucleoli. Sieve-like appearance of chromatin pattern is seen in myeloblast. So again, pag myeloblast, malaki pa siya. Pero, in this case, mas malaki daw si promyelocyte compared to myeloblast. They have ovoid nucleus and their nucleoli is now indented. There's also presence of deeply staining cytoplasm, but the cytoplasm of promyelocyte is more basophilic and now contains azurophilic granules. Okay? Meron na siyang azurophilic granules. Sa myeloblast, wala. Si promyelocyte, kaya nga granulopoiesis, the azurophilic granules will begin in promyelocyte. Okay? Okay, look. This is the myeloblast, no cytoplasmic granules, but as this myeloblast progresses or matures, The presence of azurophilic granules will be seen in promyelocyte. Okay? This is being secreted in the Golgi apparatus. Okay? Next, myelocyte. If your promyelocyte is the appearance of your azurophilic granules, your myelocyte now will have the appearance of specific granules in the developing myelocyte. So, kapag myelocyte na, specific granules na siya. Ibig sabihin, depende na lang kung magiging neutrophil siya, basophil, or eosinophil. Gets, class? Now, as this progresses or mature, there is reduction in size, there is decreased basophilia. What else? The nucleoli will disappear and the chromatin materials are more dense. But at the myelocyte, please take note na doon lang siya magkakaroon ng specific granules. Just like in this illustration, no? Specific granules na siya. Ibig sabihin, hindi niya na alam kung magiging neutrophil ba siya. Dito na niya na malalaman kung maging eosinophil na ba siya or basophil, etc. Okay? Now, in the granulopoiesis myelocyte, ito na po siya. Alright? So, the neutrophilic myelocyte, sabi natin na myelocyte, specific granules na siya. In neutrophil, specific granules contain alkaline phosphatase and phagocytin. In eosinophilic myelocyte, they are large and refractile and they contain acid hydrolytic enzyme and oxidase enzymes. In basophilic myelocyte, they are irregularly sized basophilic granules which contains heparin, histamine, and serotonin. Class, please memorize the specific granules containing in each myelocyte. Neutrophilic, eosinophilic, basophilic. Doc, bakit po? Kasi, mamaya, as this neutrophilic myelocyte, eosinophilic myelocyte, and basophilic myelocyte matures, gan din ang specific granules nila. Okay? Okay, what about metamyelocyte? The nucleus here, there is the beginning of a lobe formation. Now, in this picture, para mas madaling tandaan, okay? In this picture, azurophilic granules nag-appear, right? In the promyelocyte. In myelocyte, there is specific granules appearance at dito na malaman kung anong neutrophil, eosinophilic ba sila. In the metamyelocyte, there is abundance of specific granules. There is dispersion of the azurophilic granules. Tapos, in metamyelocyte class, there is the lobe formation already. Okay? There is lobe formation. The cytoplasm is a deep pink in color and the nuclear pattern is becomes denser. In the neutrophilic metamyelocyte, ito na. The nucleus becomes irregular and often assumes a band formation. Now, if you notice some stab cell, no, pag sa mga complete blood count or CBC, rinig kayo ng mga stab cell. Stab cell is known as your neutrophilic metamyelocyte. Okay? The nucleus becomes irregular and nagko-form ng band. In eosinophilic metamyelocyte, it is frequently bilobed, but in the basophilic metamyelocyte, the nucleus does not differentiate into distinct lobes as of this stage. Okay? Ang tatandaan nyo lang dito in the metamyelocyte is the beginning of lobe formation and the neutrophilic metamyelocyte is known as your stab cell. Okay, and ito na, ang mga mature forms. These are your granular leukocyte or your granular white blood cells. No? They are lobulated now and the cytoplasm contains each granules. Now, class, pag tinanong ko sa inyo, how many nucleus are there in neutrophil 1? Eosinophil 1, basophil 1. Okay? Isa lang po ang nucleus nila. Lobulated lang. Ibig sabihin, kapag neutrophil, there are approximately 3 to 5 lobes. Eosinophil is bilobe. And basophil is also has bilobe or two lobes pero one nucleus lang. Okay? So, favorite question namin yun minsan. How many nucleus, no? Number of nucleus. Ang palaging sinasagot nila, bilobe. No? 3 to 5 sa neutrophils. No. The number of nucleus for this granular leukocyte is 1. Clear? Okay. What about thrombopoiesis? So, the thrombopoiesis is the term for platelet formation or thrombocytes. Thrombocytes is also known as our blood platelets. Now, concerned with the protection against blood loss by promoting clotting at the sites of tissue injury, and the platelets originate in the red bone marrow actually. The fragmentation of the cytoplasm of the huge megakaryocyte will become platelets na. Now, the polymorphonuclear megakaryocyte, pag nag-fragment ang cytoplasm na yan, magiging platelets. So, you cannot find megakaryocyte sa circulation. Kapag megakaryocyte, nag-fragment ang cytoplasm niya, platelet lang po ang pupunta sa blood circulation. Now, this is your thrombopoiesis from the megakaryoblast to promegakaryocyte and megakaryocyte. Lahat po ito nasa bone marrow lang. Okay? Now, kailan magkakaroon ng platelets? Yan. Kapag nag-fragment itong cytoplasm ng megakaryocyte na nakikita sa bone marrow, itong megakaryocyte hanggang bone marrow lang siya. Platelets ang pupunta sa blood circulation, not the megakaryocyte. So, how are these platelets formed? From the fragmentation of the cytoplasm of megakaryocyte. Okay? Alright, so let's start with the megakaryoblast. It has a large cell with round nucleus, inconspicuous nucleoli with loose chromatin. So basically, it's basophilic, malaki. No? The promegakaryocyte, look, meron din silang azurophilic granules, just like the promyelocyte. Diba? Meron na azurophilic granules. In the megakaryocyte, this is the most important stage of in the thrombopoiesis. It has a very large and lobulated nucleus. The azurophilic granules now are scattered but generally absent from the zone or zone of pale blue ectoplasm. The ectoplasm class becomes less conspicuous but the azurophilic granules becomes clustered. Kaya nga kapag nag-fragmentation ng megakaryocyte, it will become platelets. Okay? Mature thrombocyte or thrombocyte per se. The thrombocytes are, what again is the function of your platelet, is for blood clot formation. That's why in dengue fever, if you have dengue fever with danger signs such as bleeding, pag tinignan nyo yung CBC nila or platelet count, ito yung madalas na tinatanong ng mga parents pag may mga dengue ang anak nila. Ano doc yung platelet count? No? Mababa po, less than 100. Kaya pala may nose bleeding, kaya pala may gum bleeding. Pero, okay, take note class, may mga dengue fever na nagbi-bleed pero normal ang platelet count. O kaya naman, may sobrang baba ng platelet count pero walang bleeding. Okay? Anong ginagawa sa dengue fever? Binibigyan ba ng antibiotics? Hindi. No? Hydration lang. At hindi agad-agad yan pag may platelet count na bababa, hindi agad-agad sinasanina ng platelet. Okay? Iba na ngayon. Ang ginagawa na is really observe if may signs of bleeding, kung mababa yung blood pressure, or nagtatae or nagsusuka ng dugo or masakit ang tiyan, no, these are addressed, no, but not solely transfusion ng platelet. Before, no, 20 bags of platelet, mababa pa din. Yung pala hindi pala platelet ang kailangan, no? Kailangan lang pala ng fresh frozen plasma para hindi lumabas yung platelet. Okay, so lymphopoiesis. Lymphopoiesis is the formation of your lymphocytes, no? They originate in the bone marrow as well. Those destined to become T lymphocytes will leave the bone marrow, no? Look, T lymphocyte, ayaw niya sa bone marrow. Saan siya pupunta? They are carried in the blood to the thymic cortex. So, tandaan nyo lang, kapag T lymphocyte, T ayon nila sa B, which is the bone marrow, ang T lymphocyte pupunta siya sa T, thymus. Okay? In the thymus, they proliferate and they acquire the characteristic surface markers as they move in the thymic medulla. No? They are transported in the spleen. They undergo further maturation and they become members of your long-lived recirculating population of your small lymphocyte. So, in short, from the bone marrow, itong T lymphocyte lang, no, not B lymphocyte, will first go to thymus, then will be transported to the spleen for maturation. At sila na po ang nagko-comprise ng T lymphocytes. Okay? Now, in this picture, from this T lymphoblast, it will become your T lymphocyte. No? Hindi lang siya dapat lymphoblast. Kailangan meron kang B or T. What about B lymphocytes? If your T lymphocyte goes to your thymus, the genesis of your B lymphocyte appears to take place in multiple sites such as the following: spleen, bone marrow, and lymphoid tissue. But the major site of B lymphopoiesis is the B bone marrow. Okay? Tandaan nyo yan. Ang dali-dali na yan. Walang magkakamali dyan. No? The development of this B lymphocyte as well as monocytes will occur in the lymphoid tissue and in the bone marrow. So, tama nga, nasa lymphatic organ siya or nasa bone marrow. But major site on lymphopoiesis, bone marrow, but the B lymphocyte will still remain at the bone marrow majority, but the T lymphocyte will go to thymus and spleen for differentiation and maturation. Yeah. And lastly, the monopoiesis. So if there is monopoiesis, there is formation of monocyte. Okay? The macrophage cell line shares with the granulocytes, and this CFU granulocyte monocyte diagram. Look, saan na yun? Yun. So, same lang sila ng progenitor cell. The GM-CSF is the granulocyte, monocyte, colony stimulating factor. So, syempre, kapag ito lang, galing siya sa myeloblast or the granulocyte colony stimulating factor. Kapag monocyte, yun lang siya. Monocyte colony stimulating factor at konti lang siya. Monoblast, promonocyte, and then monocyte. Okay? Yun lang. Any questions? So, in this topic number 1, in the bone marrow and blood cell formation, ito lang po ang summary niya. But I've discussed, I emphasize those na kailangan natin tandaan. Okay? Thank you.